Hi, welcome back to the Millennium Review. I'm Belle.
I'm Sophie.
And today we have our February Valentine episode.
Happy Valentine's Day. We're going to start with a few announcements.
The Salon of Fine Arts, a student-run organization, had their first literature salon last month, and they're looking to hire people for positions with their website, outreach, finance, directors of art, and community engagement, so check that out.
FSU's English Honor Society is holding a Valentine's open mic on the 16th at Midtown Reader. You can bring poetry about heartbreak and love and everything else.
FSU libraries are holding a few Valentine's themed events at both Dirac and Strozier, so check out their Instagrams to get the scoop on what's coming up.
They also have signs in the bathrooms, so if you're in there,
the toilet times.
Find out. So for this podcast episode, we wanted to talk about rom-coms because it's February and it's Valentine's Day, but specifically rom-coms based on classic literature. So we're going to talk about Clueless and 10 Things I Hate About You, because those are two top dogs in the rom-com world.
Iconic favorites.
Yeah. I thought that this could kind of tie into my WePo and Rhetoric classes that I've taken. And I know we talked a little bit about our time here at FSU and courses we've taken in another episode that's not out yet, which might be a short on the Instagram. But
sneak peek.
Thought we could tie that in here. And we talked a lot about like remixes in my Rhetoric and WePo classes and about what that kind of means when you remix something and how that translates into whatever time period. So I was thinking we could talk about how some of these iconic stories that we know as rom-coms have kind of changed what the original thing was for, in my opinion, less of a misogynistic tone, because a lot of these stories, like Shakespeare and stuff, have some undertones that aren't very nice. But we're gonna talk about the 90s and their movies, so
I think it's also interesting that, well, part of the reason why we chose Clueless and 10 Things I Hate About You is because right now we're seeing such a cultural movement of 90s fashion coming back. And both movies have like iconic outfits in them. So we wanted to kind of play on the cultural significance of the movies right now, the fact that they're crowd pleaser, fan favorites, pretty much everyone knows them. And kind of just highlight how they reference back to their original story.
So one of the movies out right now that's newer is the rom-com that Sydney Sweeney did with Glenn Powell. I don't know. I don't know his name. That guy from Top Gun. But Anyone But You is what it's called, and it is an adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing, which is another Shakespeare play. So I just think it's interesting, like, even though we're talking about the 90s, like, you're seeing this stuff really recently. Like, that was literally 2023, right? Or 2024. Like, literally this year it came out.
Right at the end of 2023.
And
yeah, it was in theaters right before Christmas break.
Much Ado About Nothing, like the primary plot of it is about like courtship and scandal involving a young hero and her suitor. Her name is Hero. Claudio, but it's about like, you know, them being witty and silly and whatever. And I haven't actually seen the Anyone But You, like the remake movie, but everyone's been saying it's really good and silly, so
we should go see it.
We're gonna go see it.
Promise. So also in rom-coms, you see this kind of enemies to lovers like trope that's a common theme. You see that in Clueless and 10 Things I Hate About You. That seems to be like part of the comedic aspect of the movie and the original stories.
Yeah.
And I think it also plays into the romance as being like more of a surprise, even though I think in rom-coms
we know what's happening.
We like know where it's going.
I think that kind of plot too, like the enemies to lovers thing, also goes back to Shakespeare, because a lot of his plays were, you know, tragedies, whatever, and also they're kind of funny, I will say. Some of them are really funny. Much Ado About Nothing's really funny. Taming of the Shrew, I don't know, I haven't read it, but it's probably funny, because 10 Things I Hate About You is funny. But like literature has always influenced film, but in the 90s they had this little resurgence with the rom-coms based on classic literature, and it makes it more accessible for younger crowds, and I think that we still see that kind of happening today. And like I was saying earlier, it just kind of updates the themes to fit whatever's going on today. And that's a big part of what we talked about in Remix. And even with Rhetoric stuff, because you look at something that's so iconic and the rhetoric in it, and if it's harmful, like it does perpetuate that type of thing, but remaking it so it's not, you know, like doing the wrong thing, then it kind of changes the narrative and makes it accessible for everyone and more interesting in our day and age. So for 10 Things I Hate About You, if you want a little plot synopsis, Belle's going to catch you up.
So 10 Things I Hate About You, we start off with our main characters, Kat and Heath Ledger.
I don't remember what his name
actually is. You don't remember his name, but you don't really need to know that. So Kat is a great character. She's very feminist. She comes across in the movie as abrasive or rude, and she kind of embraces that like characterization of herself. And as the movie goes on, you find out a little bit more of why. Heath Ledger is basically paid to go out with her, and then he ends up really falling in love with her. Yada yada yada. He's really gorgeous. There's a musical number, but not a cringy one, and you root for them in the end.
Yeah, I don't like the original Taming of the Shrew by Shakespeare is literally what it, like the name implies, like taming of the shrew. So the main girl in it is the shrew, and like she's not suitable for high society stuff, whatever. So this guy kind of goes in. I don't know if he's paid in it. I can't remember. I think that's just part of the movie, but he's changing her for it. But in this film, we don't see her changed for it, and we get to see her like experience love or like a first love or crush or whatever.
I would say, if anything, they both change in the way that Kat is. She becomes more open-hearted, I think more romantic and hopeful. Like, she chooses to trust Heath Ledger in the end of the movie. And I think that he changes in his, obviously, his perspective and love for her, but also seeing her point of view on how messed up their high school situation is, their high school life, and like the high society in the rom-com would obviously be like the clique of popular kids that they're kind of mixed in with, and he really sees why she's so angry and why she really doesn't care what these people think of her, because she thinks so little of them. And I think that's a really important like message in the movie.
Yeah, it's like, because like I was saying, like the original, it's very like, this is what's happening. He's changing this woman for whatever means. But in this, it's a mutual kind of growth. It's not even like a forced, you know, trying to pick someone apart and be like, you need to conform to whatever. And also the interesting part of that movie is Kat's sister in it, because she's supposed to be kind of like Mean Girl vibes, but it doesn't fit the classic like stereotypical Mean Girl I feel like we see in a lot of movies or rom-coms, because she's like a brainiac, like she gets really good grades and all this stuff, and she's not necessarily like mean, I would say. She's just kind of snobby, and she doesn't understand why Kat is like against all this like patriarchal kind of stuff, but she kind of understands it towards the end of the movie too. So we see a lot of growth from all the characters, which is important, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Bianca is a really interesting character for the way that she starts out kind of so critical of Kat and so okay with excluding her from the social like group, and then when she experiences her own hardships and her own exclusion and rejection within that group, she's more open to understanding why Kat is the way that she is and why she's okay and why she's I think that Bianca comes to understand that you can be genuinely happy being yourself and not needing to be in an accepted clique of people.
I wanted to talk about Clueless, which is based off of Emma by Jane Austen, right? That's right, yeah.
Yes.
And I was doing some like reading on it, and I've seen the newer version of Emma. I think it's a movie with what's her name? Anya Taylor-Joy.
Yes.
And honestly, because I wasn't aware that Clueless was based off this until I was thinking about it. And since watching the new like updated version of it with Anya Taylor-Joy, I don't know how to say this other than the vibes in it are really similar to like kind of how Clueless is in a way. I don't know how to explain it, but I think those two are really good updated versions of like the original story. And I think that watching that version of Emma can help people understand how Clueless is pretty similar to it, and it follows like the same story and honestly really closely. I feel like a lot of the plot line is basically the same because Emma and Cher both take on the task of like making over someone, and they eventually learn about, you know, like community and love and whatever. And it's not about making over the people, but they both have a very similar story, and it's different from 10 Things I Hate About You in the way that there was a lot of creative liberty with that, which there still is with Clueless, obviously, but it follows that same type of line, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I think that's interesting about both Clueless and 10 Things I Hate About You as movies is that they really create a whole aesthetic around the movie. Like the music, the color scheme for all the characters' clothing. Clueless is this really bright pop, like girly movie with this crazy over the top like outfits that Cher and her friends wear, white tights and bright yellow skirt and jacket set, like going to high school. And I think that 10 Things I Hate About You creates more of like a late 90s early 2000s very cool aesthetic. So I think that both movies, when you talk about vibes, they both kind of create their own vibe, and still perfectly go off of their original story.
Yeah. And like in Clueless, Cher is 16 and Emma's I think 22 in Emma. So like it's like minor tweaks like this that kind of make it relatable to the audience alongside, you know, the whole vibe that we were just talking about. And like in 10 Things I Hate About You, more of the misogynistic undertones. Emma doesn't have that much of that. But it like translates to a teen audience with the changes, even though there is the questionable relationship between her and her stepbrother. Or what even is it? What's the relationship?
It's the 90s is what it is.
Yeah. But it's, I don't know.
Okay, technically speaking, ex-stepbrother. But not to spoil Clueless for anyone, yes, that is like the love interest, and he is in college or something. We're not really
And she's
sure.
what? Did I just say 16? That's a little bit, there's a gray area there.
Yeah, she's learning how to drive. She has her white Jeep.
Yeah. And like that also goes into some of the other stuff. Like, so in Clueless, we see Cher's original love interest is Christian, who's gay. And the original Frank in Emma is engaged to another woman, and that's like the conflict of those initial people. And like having LGBTQ representation in it, although very kind of like on the nose, plays into stereotypes because it's the 90s. It is a way that you see this kind of evolving with the times. And like, I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more remakes of the same movie. Like, you know how we're having not High School Musical, what am I saying?
Mean Girls.
Mean Girls, the musical, the movie, which we're also going to get into because I don't know how I feel about when it gets so convoluted like that. But I don't know, you see every once in a while like this kind of remake of it, and I'm sure there's movies that I'm not aware of that do the same type of thing that are from original texts and everything.
Well, I think that there's something to be said for stories that are so well loved by one generation and the one generation's passion for passing it to the next. But there's also this recognition of having to alter the story or the characters or the setting, the time, etc. to make it relatable to the generation that you're trying to give it to. I think a great example of this would be Disney movies, as painful as that is to say. Yeah. Live action movies and like just the way that Disney has evolved their own stories. Like we've seen live action Cinderella, live action Little Mermaid, I think is a great example of change with the characters, the casting, everything. There's new music in these new movies, and it's kind of this way to revamp these old animations that we grew up on for the next generation of kids to watch and to find entertaining.
Like, I think as English majors, or if you're an EWM or whatever, which is still an English major, but you talk a lot about this type of remix stuff because it's something that you have to implement going forward when you're looking at like new ideas, because everything kind of ties back to the same core things, you know? Like we have the same story format for every story, it feels like, you know what I mean? And that definitely differs culturally, and we have a very Western perspective on it. But it's interesting to see how the book becomes the movie, and then someone might be inspired by the movie and then write another book, and then that becomes like a whole loop, and it like feeds back into itself. So moving forward and like updating everything so it's not misogynistic or like uninclusive, or not uninclusive, what am I saying? Exclusive, or like, you know, just questionable.
And one thing, when you say misogynistic, this just made me think, in 10 Things I Hate About You, I mean, not only is Kat such pro-feminism, pro-women, independence, there's other references to women that Kat makes in the movie with the books that she reads and the music she listens to and the things that she's interested in. So not only do they do away with the original misogynistic undertones in Shakespeare's work, they kind of flip the whole thing on its head to make it so feminist and so pro-women and so supporting women doing what makes them happy and having a voice.
Yeah. So like on the subject of remixes, we're moving away from movies now, but which isn't the point, but it's okay. I thought a lot about Hozier when I was writing stuff up about 10 Things I Hate About You or Emma, because he does a lot of the allusions to Greek myth, especially in his last album, but he switches it up a lot. So it's like you were saying, how 10 Things I Hate About You kind of like flips the misogyny on its head. Yeah. I feel like he does a really similar thing because his albums are very like pro-woman. Like he loves women. It's a great, you know, like it's not, he's using these myths without it being at the expense of anyone, specifically women in this case. And I think that's what we kind of see as this stuff is being adapted and moved into different spheres of media. Because you see, like, you know, we have like movies for Greek myth, we have like retellings of it, like Circe, Madeline Miller, like women writers, authors, and we see it in music too, which I just think is exciting because remix is everywhere.
One of our favorite retellings, mutual favorites, is The Poetry by Carol Ann Duffy. Yeah. And she does an incredible job. Her book's called The World's Wife, of turning fairy tales into these feminist stories and telling every original, telling a majority of original fairy tales, folklore, mythology from the woman's point of view, even if the woman wasn't the direct protagonist or antagonist. But she does cover that. And in the book, she talks about Circe. She talks about Little Red Riding Hood. She talks about Persephone. I mean, but in this very new way that gives a new perspective to these women that have been characters for hundreds of years.
Yeah. And it's so important. I think people can get frustrated, like we were just talking about too, like you see these remakes on movies or like books or whatever, and it can get really annoying because it seems like it's the same stuff over and over and over again. And I think that's so fair, but I also think that rewriting this stuff and changing the connotation with this stuff is so important, because what you do have as popular culture is what's going to be reflected back in society. So if you have these values in these movies or music or like what you're reading, that's how people start to think about it. And that's just a natural effect to being surrounded by something. So even though it's just a rom-com, it's important and it matters that it's been rewritten, and it's fun pop culture. Like who doesn't want to watch this stuff, you know?
Yeah, agreed. I think, honestly, I love Emma. I love the classic Emma, the 90s movie of Emma that sticks to the book, and then the new version. But Clueless is kind of its own thing, and it has this amazing way of retelling the story in a fun, bright, vibrant way. And at the same time, it can stand alone as its own story. Yeah. I think that's so important for generations who won't be interested in Emma because of the historical context in it. But they'll be open to Clueless. Right. And I think that is why these remixes matter so much. Also, Heath Ledger, like,
he's really hot in the movie, and it's a good little sing-along that he does in the amphitheater. But this is our February episode, so...
All right, well, happy Valentine's Day. We hope you guys enjoyed.
Have a lovely weekend and a great Valentine's Day.